a look at a typical sort of M&A process. Now, it may involve different types of steps, but in general, there are several steps that organizations go through. And depending on the specifics of the transaction and the industries involved, it might differ slightly. But in general, this is what I'm going to present to you as a general framework. And of course, each step requires careful planning, a lot of thought behind it regarding the execution, coordination, to ensure that you have a successful outcome in every step. So it starts with what we call the strategic planning, which starts with the acquiring company identifying the strategic objectives, which means what is it that I want to accomplish? Is it that I need to go through acquire new technology, acquire new talent? Maybe I want to diversify my products, my services, maybe expand customer base. Again, there are many reasons behind the need for M&A. Once you've identified that, you then start looking at potential targets that align with the goals that you have. So that's what goes under strategic planning. Target identification is where all of your research and analysis is conducted to identify potential target companies that fit to these strategic objectives that you defined. So the strategic objectives, of course, of the acquiring company. Following the process, you go into the next step, which is what we call the due diligence. And this is a comprehensive process which is conducted on the target company to assess things such as the financial health of the company, their legal standings, operational efficiency, market position, and many, many other factors. So it's a very comprehensive step. And then, of course, it also involves reviewing the financial statements, legal documents, contracts, intellectual property, and more. Then you go into the valuation phase where you try to assess the value of the target company, and you also do that through various methods. And of course, with that process comes negotiations, which takes place between the acquiring company and the target company to agree on the terms and conditions of the deal, of course, including the price of purchase, the payment structure, and other key terms and conditions. Then you go to agreement and documentation. Once the negotiations are complete, then you draft the agreement, and then it gets signed by both parties. And of course, this agreement then outlines the terms of transaction, including all the conditions that you go through. So that's what is included in the due diligence and evaluation phase at a high level. Then you go into the third step of the process, which is the regulatory approval. And this step really is not always mandatory. It depends on the nature of the transaction and the industries that you're in. But you may need to require that approval from, let's say, government entities or other authorities or governing bodies. Following that, you go into the fourth step, which is integration planning. So integration planning, this is a very important and critical step. Again, this is all happening before you start looking into the merger process. And that is where you detail an integration plan to outline what is your plan for bringing in operations, your systems, the processes, even the cultures of the acquiring and the target companies. How are you going to integrate them together post the transaction? Okay. Then once this is done, you go into the finalizing the transaction, which is the closing process, where all of the legal and financial documents are executed, and the ownership of the target company is then officially transferred to the acquiring company. So the paperwork is done, and now you're ready to go to the final step. So what is the final step? The final step is the post-merger integration. So this is after the deal is closed. You go into integrating the acquired company into the acquiring company, and this involves aligning again. There are three main pillars: your processes, the structure, the people, cultures, the teams, and try to realize these synergies and maximize the value of the combined entity. Of course, as part of that phase, a very important process happens, which is what we call org separation or divestitures, or even sometimes you hear the word carve out or exit phase, which is another integral part of this process. And then finally, there is the monitoring and adjustments. You can also treat that as a separate process. I put it together with post-merge integrations. After you're done with the merge, after you have the merged entity, after you combine the data, processes, and everything, then you monitor the performance of the merged entity over time. And of course, you might have to do some minor adjustments or some major adjustments here and there to ensure that the integration objectives are met and that the value is maximized. So that's basically where we come in, the last part of the process. This is where, which is facilitated by Nakisa HR Suite. Okay. So before we go into what are the different aspects of this post-merger integration and monitoring process, I want to just talk a little bit about this. So Ron Ashkenazi, he wrote a blog on Harvard Business Review where he said that the dirty little secret about M&A is that the human dimensions and culture are at least as important, if not more critical, than the strategy, the price, and positioning. Now, this is very important. I'd like to emphasize this, and of course, we all know it, but cultural integration plays a critical role in this whole process, and this will really determine the success of the transaction moving forward. It's not about, doing financial alignment, but it's about looking at, disparate organizational cultures that you need to integrate harmoniously together. And if you neglect to do that, you may risk having negative impacts on your operations, as you may end up with a lot of challenges post-merger, such as very low employee morale, productivity is impacted, employee retention. So it's not so uncommon to hear about high turnover rates when companies acquire other companies. Employees feel like they don't belong anymore, and they just decide to leave. And of course, we know that the high cost of turnover. So again, this is something that we need to always look at, and ultimately can have a negative implication overall and the success of the integration. So the human aspect and culture integration are very crucial and arguably some of the most challenging aspect of this integration process.